Hello, everyone. This is Rosalind Sedacca, and you're listening to Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. And I am here to talk to people who are focused on helping families before, during, and long after divorce to make the best decisions about their children. As you all know, I'm founder of the Child-Centered Divorce Network, and my passion is helping parents avoid the serious mistakes we all see too often. And I love to invite guests on who have a unique way of handling divorce done right, who have made decisions and choices and share wisdom that's going to be very positive and powerful for all of us who are listening. And today is no exception at all. I'm very excited to be talking to Sarah Armstrong, and she is the author of a very wonderfully written book about divorcing as a mom. So I'm going to ask Sarah to introduce herself and tell you about her book, and then we'll get rolling.
Great. Thank you, Rosalind, for having me today. And yes, so I actually am an author that wrote a book called The Mom's Guide to a Good Divorce. And it's what to think through when children are involved. And it's really all about helping women, and in fairness, men too, who choose to read the book, really think about the decisions they need to make and the discussions they need to have about those decisions to make sure that they're keeping their children in focus every step of the way. And that I really fundamentally believe that a good divorce is an attainable outcome, but you have to approach it in a very specific way in order to achieve that outcome.
Well said. As founder of the Child-Centered Divorce Network, I am in total agreement with you. I think a good divorce is definitely doable for everyone who puts effort into it. But I know that you came about this not as a person who's involved with divorce professionally. You have a very successful career outside of it. So how did this book come about?
Yeah, well, no, it's a great question. So, and actually, I always like to start, Rosalind, to say, just for the record, I'm not an advocate for divorce. In an ideal world, couples that get married, right, would stay happily together for the long term. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. And these days it's more common than ever. So in my situation, I got divorced when my daughter was 7, and that was actually 14 years ago. She's now 21, which is amazing. And I was raised, I should mention, I was raised by an amazing couple who are still married 55 years. And I did not grow up, I grew up in a very healthy home from a marriage standpoint, but I did see some very ugly divorces within my parents' friend group growing up, and that really stuck with me. So when we got to the point where we were going to go down the path of getting divorced, I said to my soon-to-be ex-husband, I have to believe that there's a different way to do this, where we keep Grace in focus and we do what's best for her. So we went through our process, and over the course of our divorce and then afterwards, I had a number of friends who would come to me and say, will you help me to think through, I've decided to get divorced, and will you help me think through the steps of doing it because of how you approached yours, and you had such a good divorce. And so I helped them over the course of 5 years or so. And then I was actually at a business dinner in Mexico City, and I was sitting next to a colleague of mine, and he turned to me and he said, Sarah, you're so happy. And I said, yeah, I'm very happy. He said, but you're divorced. And I said, someone getting divorced is not a death sentence. I said, my ex-husband and I decided to no longer be married to each other, but I'm happy, Grace is happy, and my ex-husband's happy. It is possible to be divorced and happy. And I mentioned that my friends had been, that I helped my friends, and they'd all been encouraging me at the end of helping each of them. They all said, you should really write this stuff down. And I said, well, I'm not a writer, to your point. I said, I'm in the business world, the corporate world, the global marketing. I don't fashion myself a writer. And so I said to my friend, I said, I should write it down. He goes, you really should. So the next morning I got on my flight out of Mexico City. I opened my personal laptop and I wrote the first line that said, this book is written by a girl who never ever thought she would get a divorce, who got a divorce, and what she learned along the way. And then I wrote about 90% of it on Delta as I traveled the world for my job. Now, the interesting thing, Rosalind, is that my daughter Grace is the one that coined the term a good divorce for me.
Mm.
And we were standing at a CVS checking out one day, and she's 8 years old. It's a year after our divorce. And there was a People magazine on the newsstand. And a celebrity couple was getting a divorce. And she goes, "Mommy, is that a good divorce or a bad divorce?" I said, "Grace, I don't know. What's the difference between a good divorce and a bad divorce?" She goes, "Well, a good divorce is when the mommy and daddy are nice to each other, like you and daddy. And a bad divorce is when they scream and yell at each other." And I said to her, "Grace, it's hard to tell from a magazine cover what kind of divorce that is. But as I walked out of that CVS that day, Rosalind, I thought, whatever we're doing, a year after our divorce, where Grace is now living across two households, we had completely changed the structure of her life, that she could tell us and tell me that she felt we had a good divorce. I knew we were onto something.
Mm-hmm.
And we were doing, the choices we were making with her as the focus were working.
Absolutely. I love that story. And it's similar to the way my former husband and I worked out what I ended up calling a child-centered divorce, and what became the focus of my work, because my son came to me when he was in his early 20s out of the blue, after we had raised him following the divorce. Both of us remarried. And my son said to me, Ma, you and Daddy did a really good job with the divorce, and I want to thank you, because most of my friends whose parents divorced either hate their parents or are very angry at them. And I think you and Daddy really did a good job." And I just let out such a sigh of relief, because you feel such guilt. You just don't know what the consequences are going to be. And there it was, all those years later, that I had that confirmation for my son. You had the confirmation from your daughter very early on, and ended up sharing your wisdom. So I'm very eager to hear some of the bites of information, because I know you're doing it in a form, it's short bites of real wisdom, very well put together, simple, but not just it's not just conversational. It's very the nuggets is what I'm looking for. Nuggets of real wisdom based on your experience. So tell us some of the nuggets that you've picked up, so we could digest some of those.
Yeah. I have a little, excuse me, a little frog in my throat. So, it's interesting. I have written the book in what I call bite-sized pieces. So it's structured in 3 phases: preparing for the change, during the change, and post the change. And there's 135 topics in the book. And each topic, there's a topic per page. So to your point, bite-sized pieces that you can just take in and maybe just read a topic and then reflect on it. So an example of one of those is one I call minimize the gaps. And one of the things when you go through a divorce is generally you're going to have a change in the physical environment for your children. Someone's going to move out. There's going to be a dividing up of the materials within the house, the household items, and you can, without knowing it, literally pull apart the physical world your children are living in and create these gaps. It could be where a chair was, or a piece of art was, or whatever the case is. So the example I give that was such a poignant moment in our divorce journey is we had a family wall, or a wall of family photos, black and white photos. It was a long wall, all interspersed in my ex-husband and my family. And I wanted to be able to give him his photos. So I took it upon myself to get other photos printed and reframed. And I sent Grace down to a play date down the street. She was 7 years old. She went to a friend's house. And I took the photos down that were from my ex-husband, put them in a box, put new photos up, put the box away. Grace came home an hour or two later, and I'm in the kitchen, and I hear this little voice from the hallway say, "Hey, Mommy." And I said, "What's that, Grace?" She said, "The wall has changed." And I stopped in my tracks, and I said, "Well, what's changed?" She said, "There are more pictures of me up there. It looks great." And she ran up to her room. And I took a huge sigh of relief. And then I thought to myself, okay, that could have gone a very different way. And what I know though, Rosalind, is if I had just taken the photos off the wall and not taken the step to actually reframe other photos and put new photos up there and just left those little hangers interspersed throughout the hallway, what Grace would be telling a therapist years later is my parents got a divorce, and my mom took the photos of my dad and his family off the wall, and she left all those little hangers.
That's right.
You know, and it's these, I say they're small. That was a project in fairness, so it did take some effort, but there's these moments your children notice everything. So those gaps that are created in their environment, if you don't take the time to think about how to fill them or rearrange things so the gaps aren't so glaring, you know, that sticks with them. You know, so you might not be able to replace everything, by the way, with the same thing. So a piece of art might come down, you might need to replace it with a mirror, right? Or the chair's gone, but you rearrange the furniture so it's just that, not that gaping hole where that chair was. So it's just thinking about these things, because all those things are signals to your children that their world has been pulled apart, that it is different. And it is going to be different, no question, but how you create the space so it's still their home, it doesn't feel like it's being pulled apart, is very important, I think. So that's an example of one of the important things that I think we have to think about when we're going through that early stage of divorce.
Such an important point, and it's mindfulness. It's
It is.
approaching your divorce, your good divorce, mindfully, so that
Yes.
you're thinking about the impact on the children and how are they perceiving it all. And when you do that, it makes all the difference in the world. Can you give us an example from the middle section?
Yes, the middle section, interestingly enough, it's kind of middle and it goes into, it's like, it's part of preparing for, but it goes into the middle section. It's called Preparing for the Professional Traveler. Now, this one came up because as we were telling Grace that we were going to get a divorce, we were engaging a child specialist that focused on divorce that was going to kind of counsel her through this. So we went to meet with him. My ex-husband and I went to meet with him, and he looked at me. Grace was not in the room. He said, "Do you travel?" And I said, "Yes, I travel internationally for my job." And he looked at my ex-husband. He said, "Do you travel?" And my ex-husband says, "Yes, I travel domestically for my job." He said, "Well, Grace is about to become a professional traveler. She's going to travel every week for the next 11 years until she heads off to college." And he said, "And she's going to have to pack a bag." And I burst into tears because I'm like, that's not what I want for my daughter. That's not the life. I don't want her to be a professional traveler. And so we walked out of that session, Rosalind, and I said to my ex-husband, "I don't know what this looks like yet, and we need to think about it, but I want to minimize that reality for Grace. I don't want her to feel like she's a professional traveler." So what we did, and again, there's some socioeconomic considerations in what I'm going to say, but I for those that can take this on, we tried to have all the basics at both homes. And when I say basics, socks, underwear, you know, jeans, an extra pair of tennis shoes, whatever the case is, so that when Grace went to school, when she walked out of either of our homes, all she was carrying was her backpack with her books. You know, she wasn't carrying an extra bag to school to be the kid that was going to her mom or dad's house at the end of the day and showing that every day to her schoolmates, like, "Why do you have this extra bag?" "Well, I'm going to dad's house, and I'm going to mom's house." And so we tried to minimize her feeling like she had to pack a bag. Now, I will say, and I say this with a little bit of lighthearted nature, there somehow things got out of balance. There were too many socks at one house versus the other. I don't know how that happens, but we would get out of balance. And so in those moments when I realized all the socks were at my ex-husband's, I would send him a text and say, "Hey, we need to rebalance." Now, it wasn't up to Grace at age 7, 8, 9, 10 to go in her drawers and figure out why everything was at one place versus not. It's not her fault that she lives across two homes. So my ex-husband and I, either of us would go in and figure out what wasn't supposed to be there. We'd put it in a bag, and as we were transitioning with her, we would give it to the other person so that they could go put it back in her drawers. Again, Grace should not have to do that. She's a child. She shouldn't have to reorganize her drawers because she's living across two homes. So that's an example from that kind of middle phase, which is you have to think about, the impact of your children living across two homes and the fact that they have, they have to figure out that dynamic for themselves emotionally and physically, but whatever you can do to minimize that feeling that they're packing a bag is so important.
Once again, a mindful approach to this, putting yourself in the child's shoes and understanding it from their perspective makes all the difference in the world. We can eliminate so many challenges and hassles when we do that in advance and see what it's like for our child, regardless of what age they're at. So that was a wonderful example. Before we go any further, I just want to make sure you tell everyone how to find you and the book so that they can get access to it.
Absolutely. So again, the book is The Mom's Guide to a Good Divorce. You can either go to my website, which is gooddivorce.guide, or you can find it on Amazon. And it's in paperback. It's in ebook format. And I also went into the studio and did an Audible version. So there's an audiobook available as well, depending on how someone wants to take in this information. And it is written in those bites so that the table of contents literally lists out those 135 topics. You can go in and just look for the topic that you might want to read about and go to that specific page and take in that specific bite-sized piece of guidance.
Excellent. A great, quick, and easy way to get information that you need just on the topic that you're looking for. So it's put together in a very user-friendly way. So let's move into the third section of the book. And what gem do you have for us to think about?
Yes. Well, I think one of the most important things in the third section is as you've gone through the divorce, and actually it's something throughout, but then in the third phase, post the change, it comes into play often, is what I call building a compartmentalization muscle. And this is about you as a mom, as a parent, and thinking about the emotions that you're going to go through in a divorce. It's a roller coaster and it's highly emotional, but your children are watching you along the way, and you have to decide when you show those emotions and whether your children are around when you show those emotions, or whether you wait and you need to get those emotions out. I'm not saying to, put them inside and never let them out, but there's times when it may be best not to show them those emotions in front of your children. So I talk about building a compartmentalization muscle. I do Pilates, so I talk, you're told to have a strong core muscle, but I think the important thing is to build this compartmentalization muscle. What that says is, if you're in a moment where your buttons have been pushed by your ex-spouse and you would like to say something or do something to express yourself, if your kids are around, say, you know what, I'm going to save that. I'm going to go for a walk later, and I'm going to call my friend and tell them all about it, or I'm going to cry in my bedroom, whatever it is, but try not to show that emotion with your kids around. And it's a muscle. It can be hard. And it's about taking the high road in those moments and thinking about what's best for your children in those moments, even though it might be harder on you. But if you can do that, then your children aren't what I call the collateral damage that can happen when we put in those toxic moments. When they see that emotion that may not be healthy for them, because they can't process it in the same way we can. And so that's one of the things I think it's a muscle you need to build along the way. But in your post-divorce phase, when you should be past it, I always say that divorce does not need to be a scarlet letter that you wear, although society would like to give it to you, in fairness. But it also doesn't have to be a negative cloud that follows you and your children throughout your lives. It's an action. You get divorced. It does not need to define the rest of your life in a negative light. I just don't believe that. And I don't think it has to for your children either. And one of the moments that we had during our divorce that was really interesting post-divorce, it was 5 years after we got divorced. Grace was in 6th grade at the time, and we needed to go to a parent-teacher conference. And in her school at 6th grade, both parents are meant to go, and the child goes in as well and sits down with the teacher. So we go in, we sit down with the teacher, we go through this hour-long conversation about how she's doing in class and school. And at the end of it, her teacher looks at us and she says, wait a minute, are you two divorced? And I looked at her and said, oh yeah, we've been divorced since she was in 1st grade. She said, I had no idea. And I looked at her and said, well, it didn't occur to me to come in here and say, hi, we're divorced. Can we now talk about how Grace is doing in her 6th grade? And she said, you would be shocked at how few parents that are divorced can walk into this office and sit down with me for an hour with their children and have a discussion about their child's education. It is very, very rare. And I looked at her and I said, that makes me really, really sad. That what is more important to two parents than how their child is doing in school and how they're doing in terms of learning and growing, and the fact that parents can't set aside all that's going on. Now, I should say, Rosalind, there are instances in divorces where the physical representation of those two people in the same room is not possible, and I appreciate that. So I'm going to set those moments aside. Those are decisions that need to be made, that they're not going to be in the same room. But for a whole nother subset of divorces, you should be able to put those emotions aside about each other to sit in that room with your child for an hour with their teacher. And by the way, Grace is hearing this whole conversation, and I said, it doesn't have to be that way. And so I do think that that's one of the things, again, what is best for your child? What are you showing them when you show up for them? So whether it's going to a school play or going to a sporting event, they should be able to look out from either of those moments when they're either on stage or on the field and look. Like my ex-husband and I always either sat next to each other or stood near each other, on the soccer field or at a school event. So when Grace looked up to look for us, she saw both of us. She didn't have to look at one side of the room and the other side, or one side of the field or the other side. She looked up and her parents were there supporting her. And I think that's what's most important. That's what kids want. They want the love and support of both of their parents, and they shouldn't have to choose which side of the field or which side of the room to look for them.
So well said. I had the same experience as you. So we've had very similar kinds of divorces. When my son graduated from the 6th grade, I was at an event at the end, and the teacher, in passing, the teacher found out that I got divorced in February, and this was June. And she said, I didn't know you got divorced this year. And I said, yes. She said, I'm shocked because most parents who divorce the children respond and change the way they behave in school and class, and we pick up on all kinds of behavior issues and sadness. And your son didn't skip a beat. He was still straight A's. And that was a real blessing for me. He was 11 years old when we divorced. It was the same kind of thing. And I had the same kind of advice, taking the high road for your child, being mindful of what the child's experiencing, and putting yourself in their shoes so that they understand the difference between mom and dad, or whoever the parents are, sitting together versus being on other sides of the room, or not ever being able to be in the same room together. All of these things are decisions that you as parents are making from the very beginning. And each one of those decisions is a supporting platform to help the child get through the process, feel that it's okay to experience what they're experiencing, and that they can trust both of their parents to respond in the most mature, responsible ways. And then it's up to us as parents to live up to that. So it's wonderful to hear that you're having that experience, that you had that experience, that your daughter grew up as well adjusted as she did through the experience, and that you've shared your wisdom in your book, because it's making a huge difference in the world for everyone. In the short time we have left, why don't you give me a takeaway of advice that you want our listeners and viewers to be paying attention to?
Yeah. I think the important thing to take away is that even though as couples, you no longer want to be married, right? You've made a commitment to your children to bring them up in the healthiest, happiest, safest environment possible. And I say that, we cover the plugs, right? We put bike helmets on them. We feed them organic milk. We do all these things to make them safe and happy and healthy. But in a divorce, it can be a toxic environment if you're not careful. And that toxic environment can have long-term impact on your children's view on relationships, their view on marriage, and their overall happiness in life. So I think it is our responsibility to take co-parenting with your ex-spouse seriously and put your children first every step of the way. And when you do that, I fundamentally believe that a good divorce is an attainable outcome.
Absolutely. Well, that's the gift we're giving to our children, and our children deserve that gift from us. So
Absolutely.
thank you, Sarah Armstrong, who's the author of A Mom's Guide to a Good Divorce. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I love your messages. They're all so well thought out and child-centered, child-focused, and that's what this is all about. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Rosalind. Truly appreciate all that you do to get the message out about child-centered divorces. I think it's such an important message for society, and I don't think there's enough conversation in society about the concept of a good divorce, and I do think we need to change that one divorce at a time.
Well, I'm in total agreement with that. So I hope you'll join us again at the Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living show on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This is Rosalind Sedacca with Child-Centered Divorce, and I hope we will join us again. Bye-bye for now.